Donald Trump's defense secretary nominee sat for his confirmation hearing, and it was wild. As you can see on screen in the B-roll, it started off with so much hecticness, and then we got into the actual substance of the hearing and somehow it got even more crazy. A reminder that defense secretary, one of the most powerful and important roles in the world, overseeing the U.S. military, the most powerful military in the world. And Hegseth is one of the most controversial and scandal-ridden one of Trump's picks. We'll get into that as we go along, but let's just start getting into clips. During Hegseth's opening statement, he was interrupted by protesters. This guy was carried out.
Thank you for figuratively and literally having my back.
You are a misogynist. Not only that, you are a Christian Zionist. And you support the war in Gaza by the Zionists.
I want to thank the authorities for their...
All right, so you had that, and then it, at a different point, another person was forcibly removed.
And readiness.
Yikes. So some stunning imagery, but like I said, something even more stunning and disturbing is what actually on substance took place during this hearing. Senator Jack Reed had some very effective grilling of Pete Hegseth, as we'll go through.
I'm also concerned about your abilities as a competent manager of organizations far less complex than the Department of Defense. From 2008 to 2010, you led the organization Veterans for Freedom, which had an annual budget of less than $10 million. In each year you were in charge, expenses far exceeded revenues until the organization teetered on bankruptcy and had to be merged with another group. In fact, according to public reporting, an independent forensic accountant reviewed the organization's finances and discovered evidence of gross financial mismanagement. I would note that this report has not been made available to any government agencies.
Yeah, so one of the reasons it's alleged that Hegseth, before his time as a Fox host, was pushed out of these nonprofits was because of financial mismanagement. Gross was the word used there. Financial mismanagement overseeing these organizations. And you have more from Reed here.
We must acknowledge the concerning public reports against you. A variety of sources, including your own writings, implicate you with disregarding the laws of war, financial mismanagement, racist and sexist remarks about men and women in uniform, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and other troubling issues. I have reviewed many of these allegations and find them extremely alarming. Indeed, the totality of your own writings and alleged conduct would disqualify any service member from holding any leadership position in the military, much less being confirmed as the Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, so whether it be the sexual assault allegation, the activity, the things he said and did when he was very drunk while at a work event, at a strip club or something, or just his general lack of qualifications for such a position, like the Secretary of Defense. All of which depict someone who should not be in this position. And then to finish out what Jack Reed had to say here.
Mr. Hegseth, you are the 9th nominee for Secretary of Defense that I've had the honor to consider as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I have voted in favor of all your predecessors, including those in the first Trump administration. Unfortunately, you lack the character and composure and competence to hold the position of Secretary of Defense.
All right, so that very level-headed, he broke it down very effectively. And there definitely were much more brutal moments, though. Some that were uncomfortable to watch, and we'll get into some of those now.
In addition to the sexual assault allegations, and by the way, the answer to my second question should have been yes. I have read multiple reports of your regularly being drunk at work, including by people who worked with you at Fox News. Do you know that being drunk at work is prohibited for service members under the UCMJ?
Senator, those
Yes
are
or no?
multiple false anonymous reports peddled by NBC
Do you
News
know
that
that
run directly
drinking on the job
contradictory to the dozens of men and women at
not
Fox News
contemplated
Channel
and-
who
I'm not
I work
hearing-
with
I'm
who
not
came
hearing
on
the
the
answer
record
to my question.
and said they've
In your
never
opening
seen
statement,
that.
Mr. Hegseth, you commit to holding leaders.
Okay. Well, if you are concerned by the reports that he'd be drunk at all sorts of inappropriate times, no need to fear. Because Markwayne Mullin, the Republican senator, has the perfect way to make us all feel better. Tons of people in power are drunk. While you watch this, please remember to click the subscribe button if you appreciate this channel.
Or I guess I better use the senator from Virginia, starts bringing up the fact that what if you showed up drunk to your job? How many senators have showed up drunk to vote at night? Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? And don't tell me you haven't seen it, because I know you have. And then how many senators do you know have got a divorce before cheating on their wives? Did you ask them to step down? No. But it's for show. You guys make sure you make a big show and point out the hypocrisy because the man's made a mistake. And you want to sit there and say that he's not qualified? Give me a joke. I mean, it is so...
This about sums up this entire hearing.
And you want to sit there and say that he's not qualified? Give me a joke.
Give me a joke. Well, we've been given a joke, okay? I think he was going for give me a break or this is a joke, but he combined them in the most beautiful and spectacular way. Just one more time.
Give me a joke.
Yeah, I don't know. He did this some other time, I think just talking to reporters. He said, oh, they're making such a deal of his infidelity. They're making such a deal of his drunkenness in the workplace. So many people here are drunk. Who hasn't been drunk at work? I don't think, Markwayne, that's the best defense of someone who would be in such a crucial position, which of course you shouldn't be drunk going into work in these positions, senator or otherwise. But it is reasonable to say there is a difference between being a senator and you're drunk while voting versus a defense secretary and you could be responding to military strikes. Right? There is a difference between how sharp you need to be at any given moment. And it's unfortunate because as I mentioned earlier, imagery or the drama, the spectacle of this hearing, I think will distract from the underlying policy issues and the underlying fundamental problem with someone like Pete Hegseth. Yes, it's the lack of qualifications. Yes, it's the personal life problems. Yes, it's the sexual assault allegation. But also, he really does seem, and I'll show you a moment that exemplifies this in a second. He really does seem to prioritize his loyalty to Trump above the Constitution or the military. And that, with so many of these nominees, that being the litmus test, is the biggest problem, because we've seen, even with just specifically the military, Trump's willingness or ambition to use it for unconstitutional means. Now, the big defense, if you're wondering, from Hegseth, whenever these things will be brought up, was that it's all baseless.
And what became very evident to us from the beginning, there was a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated in the media against us. That was clear from moment one. And what we knew is that it wasn't about me. Most of it was about President Donald Trump, who's had to endure the very same thing for much longer amounts of time. And he endured it in incredibly strong ways.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the way to convince people that you're subjected to such a crazy smear campaign, just like Trump was. Just like Trump was treated so poorly. I was talking to some Trump supporter. I think it may have been on the Digital Social Hour. And I said, what do you mean? Now I'm blanking on the specifics, but we had talked about how, from his perspective, all these stories about Trump are negative. And I said, well, give me an example, because we could assess if it's fair or unfair. And the example that was brought up was ground by the P word. There was so much negative coverage about that, was the example he brought up. And I was thinking, how do you cover that positively? And that's what happens so often. They've made synonymous coverage of true bad stories and a smear campaign. A smear campaign necessarily includes negative and dishonest stories, not just negative. Negative and fabricated, but just now negative coverage, even if it's justified, is described as a smear campaign or a witch hunt. And a weird contradiction that Hegseth does a lot is, hey, I've made so much progress in my life. Yes, my mom wrote that email to me saying I was all these terrible things, but now we both say that I've changed. And yeah, I did a lot of bad things in my past, but I've changed. Can we not do redemption? And also, I didn't do any of those things you're saying I did, and it's a smear campaign. Well, did you make this amazing progress and now you're a new man? Or have you always been this great person and all the stories that make us question that are lies? Now, one moment I genuinely struggled to watch, as I mentioned previously, because Senator Tim Kaine makes a connection that I've never thought of making that is devastating.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good. I assume that in each of your weddings, you've pledged to be faithful to your wife. You've taken an oath to do that, haven't you?
Senator, as I've acknowledged to everyone in this committee.
Where do you think he's going with this? Because it's, I don't think these hearings should be so much about the soundbite, but this is a soundbite.
Not a perfect person, not claiming to be.
But no, I just asked a simple question. You've taken an oath, like you would take an oath to be Secretary of Defense in all of your weddings to be faithful to your wife. Is that correct?
I have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
In finalizing...
You took an oath to your wife like you took an oath, like you're going to take an oath to the Constitution. If you were so willing to violate that oath, how do we know you'll keep this one? I don't know where the line is of involving too much personal stuff and diving into the complications of someone's personal life with alleged crimes or politically relevant things. Totally makes sense. But that's a really interesting point, even if we're starting to wade into some very, very personal territory. Then you have Senator Alyssa Slotkin making or demonstrating a brilliant line of questioning here.
To include 5,000 National Guardsmen from Indiana and Texas who are at the border right now, allowing for border security. So there is plenty of precedent
duty military
for military
to
members
staff detention
our southern
centers.
border.
Our U.S. military is not trained in law enforcement roles. I think you know that, right? We've seen how that mission is difficult for them in places like Iraq and Afghanistan because that's not the training a uniformed military comes with. Do you support the use of active duty military in supporting detention camps?
Senator, everything we will do would be lawful and under the Constitution, but I recognize that this administration has abdicated its responsibility. President Trump is going to restore order at the border, prevent our enemies from invading, and yes, he has said
Sir, I get your filibustering. I get it.
Part of what happens.
In the spirit of preserving.
Yeah, so what happened here, this was the tail end of minutes of Slotkin trying to get from Hegseth a clear answer. Will you refuse an order if it's brazenly unconstitutional? Like things that Trump previously wanted to do that he was talked, out of doing. And Hegseth would go, I reject the premise because I do not believe that Trump would ask me. No. Doesn't matter Trump, anyway. Would you, and she would just restate the question, if any president asked you to do something unconstitutional, like using the military in unconstitutional ways, would you, or how would you respond? And he just would not answer it, which is frightening because it means he's worried that if he were to say, of course, my oath is first to the Constitution, not to a person, then that could make Trump upset, which is a scary place to be. Again, with all that is so disturbing about Hegseth's past and his lack of qualifications, nothing is more disturbing than his willingness to put Trump above all else. Another good Tim Kaine slapdown.
States. Are there any other important facts that you chose not to reveal to the president-elect and his team as they were considering you to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I sit here before you an open book, as everyone who's watched this process.
With multiple non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements tying the hands of many people who would like to comment to us.
Oh. Whoops. Not a bad point. Not a bad point at all. This was weird. I was going to explain. Just watch.
To be clear, are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to depend on the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours. But what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield. America First understands we send Americans for a clear mission and a clear objective. We equip them properly for that objective. Right, we give them everything they need.
So we're not going to follow international law? Huh? One of the big controversies, well, I guess it's not big for him. It was one of his smaller ones. But one of the things that was widely circulated was that clip of him saying that women shouldn't be in any combat roles. And Elizabeth Warren went back and forth with him on that.
Senator, again, I very much appreciate you bringing up my comments from 2013, because for me, this issue has always been about standards. And unfortunately, because of some of the people that have been in political power for the last 4 years, priorities other than standards, lethality, and meritocracy have driven decision-making.
I'm quoting you from the podcast. Women shouldn't be in combat at all. Where is the reference to standards, that they should be there if they can carry, if they can run? I don't see that at all, Mr. Hegseth. What I see is that there's a 32-day period in which you suddenly have another description about your views of women in the military. And I just want to know, what changed in the 32 days that the song you sang is not the song you come in here today to sing?
Yeah, so that's a huge thing with a lot of these nominees. They change a lot once they're nominated, and the reason is rather obvious. Now, I think most people agree that you're going to have a certain standard, and Elizabeth Warren's correct that whenever he made those comments about women in combat roles, he didn't say they should only be in those roles if they can pass a certain standard. It was just in general. So she's correct. And I agree. In the combat roles, let's have high standards, and then whoever can achieve those, great. But I think also when we were listening to the whole hearing, a lot of what was being talked about was how he would keep saying just lethality, lethality. We got to have just warriors, warriors, warriors. And that is also super, super valuable. And we do need some warriors out there. We need some people who can do the lethal jobs and be on the ground and all of it. What's strange, though, is I don't hear from some of these folks an understanding of the military endeavors of the future, right? And how while we will need on-the-ground combat roles, there's a lot of stuff technologically, engineering-wise, etc., that is much more cerebral and incredibly militarily important, especially as the means by which we fight wars changes a lot. So I want us to definitely have, when that's what we're in need of, the warriors that Hegseth talks about. That doesn't mean you have to flout international law, for one, but it also shouldn't be a mindset that is old school, such that it omits real investments and thus recruiting that matches that might not be your archetype of a service member, but is very much necessary given the wars of the present and future. And that I did not hear him speak about. One more moment, he got quizzed and failed badly.
Not qualified to that. You could do acquisition and cross-servicing agreements, which essentially are security agreements. You can't even mention that. You've done none of those. You talked about the Indo-Pacific a little bit, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. Can you name the importance of at least one of the nations in the ASEAN, and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations? And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of nations in that, but I know we have allies in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia and trying to work on submarines with them.
Mr. Hegseth, none of those countries are in ASEAN. None of those 3 countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations. Look, sir.
I get, well, I guess not if you're going to be the defense secretary. In a different setting, I don't think it means you're clueless if you miss a particular question like that. But yeah, being the defense secretary, you should know. ASEAN, she's talking about the acronym for Association of Southeastern Asian Nations. And he named 3 countries and none of them were in it. Oh, that's brutal. That's awkward. Pete, I think he got paid like $4.7 million. I don't think I've pulled up, but something like that. North of $4 million over 2 years to be a weekend Fox and Friends host. That's the gig. Go back to it, brother. Okay? I think that's where your skills are better served. Terribly served because that network is so dishonest, but for you, I think that would be better. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Support the show, get the members only bonus show by clicking that join button below.